and the theory is, there is a theory that explains some of the bizarre after effects of 9/11 in that area, which is, for example, a lot of cars parked miles away were turned into instant rust. Now, how is that explained by controlled? It isn't explained by controlled demolition. It sure as hell isn't explained by a gasoline fire that supposedly melted 2 buildings, or 3, including Building 7. But the buildings right near the Twin Towers had holes bored into them, not from an explosive shooting up. This is buildings 3, 4, 5, and 6. Very close to the Twin Towers, which were buildings 1 and 2. And Building 7 is way off, if you've ever been or you've seen a map. It's like half a block away, not hit by anything, essentially, but went down in a controlled demolition later that day on 9/11. And there's reasons for that, which I could explain if you want to go into it. But those buildings 3, 4, 5, and 6 were reported by newspaper, or I should say radio and TV people who weren't in on it at the time and didn't shut their mouths yet, were saying that there are explosions going off in those buildings. Well, nobody's ever said, what's his name, Osama, planted bombs in those buildings. It's been very covered up by the media. But when you look at the photos from the sky, it looks like holes drilled from space. And the theory is, there is a theory that I think really should be looked into more than it is, that it is SDI, that day was a test from SDI to shoot their beams from space into the Twin Towers and turn it into dust. And before it could be aimed properly, it was boring holes in those buildings from the sky. Because the pictures of those buildings show clear, sharp escarpments of a black hole in those buildings, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the way that the holes go chronologically is they move closer and closer to the Twin Towers.
For those of us that don't know,
let me just say this one other point. This is a very important thing. The Building 7, which is only 47 stories, had a debris pile, let's say like this. Buildings 1 and 2, the Twin Towers, which were 190-something stories or 100 stories, including the roof, had a debris pile like this. So matter actually disappeared in the destruction of the Twin Towers. The debris, again, 47-story, 90-something story. Why was there such a huge variance?
the size of the basement. The towers had deeper basements.
No, the basements were never gotten into. No, that's not why. There was a basin, there still is a basin, underneath built the Twin Towers that protected it from the water beneath the towers. And that basin was never cracked or injured with the debris supposedly falling on it.
But still, that went down 11 stories into the ground. So there was this big hole that the debris could go into.
No, but the differential debris of Building 7 is much higher than 11 stories compared to the building debris of 2 buildings that were cumulatively not the total of the debris of Building 7, that were twice as big, each of them twice as big, with then theoretically twice as much matter. So where did the matter go? Well, the theory is, and I believe it, short of getting another theory from another quarter, that this was a test to show the world basically this. Beijing, Moscow, and anybody else, you better be afraid of us, because look what we did to our own people. We will do this to you too. You better not interfere with us when we go on our wars. And very interestingly, China and Russia haven't lifted a finger to stop us.
But the question of It could have been, like you say, SDI. What, by the way, is SDI, for those that don't know?
The Strategic Defense Initiative started by the Reagan administration.
Star Wars, right?
Star Wars.
Yeah.
Which was just as bad as Bush, for those lucky enough to be young not to have experienced the Reagan terms. It started off this latest round of evil. As you were saying, you could go back 240 years. Mm-hmm. Well, there were periods since 1770, let's just start there, where there actually were idealists in charge of the government. I mean, they were fleeting. They had to put up with terrible garbage like slavery. Some of them didn't like it. Some of them did. Jefferson, for one, liked slavery because he never did anything to stop it. It's one of the American myths that Jefferson was this wonderful small r Republican who wanted freedom and democracy for everybody. No. He wanted it for white males primarily to have no authority over them, including the authority of corporations. He didn't want that. So he was a little r Republican in that sense and a little d Democrat in that sense. But when it came to primarily black people, oh no, he was a tyrant. In fact, he was elected in 1800 on the strength of the 3/5 rule that was put in the Constitution by the slave states to make sure that they had more electoral votes than the northern states, because they counted each slave as 3/5 of a citizen. So that way their totals in the House of Representatives and their electoral votes were always just enough to overcome the totals of the northern states, even though the northern states were more populated. This is an example of how the country has been evil right from the get-go, committing evil deeds, stealing representation from the majority of the people to keep slavery going. I mean,
and let's not forget the era of the robber barons either. Oh. After slavery ended, we had the robber barons for 50 years or half a century, and finally they're
still going on.
FDR finally put a stop to that, but now we're back there again.
Yeah.
The New Deal is over, and
he allowed it to live and continue, but they were definitely under the thumb of what I would think of as a good group of people in government at that point. Again, Roosevelt wanted a constitutional freedom from fear. Well, how would you mandate that? You sure wouldn't do it by telling everybody that the world's a dangerous place every 3 weeks, which is what this crappy government has been doing every year of my life, and I'm 60. And you don't do it by going on wars to supposedly liberate people by killing them in mass piles, like 1.5 million. Maybe an old estimate now of the number of people that we are responsible for killing in Iraq. And we are responsible for that because we're letting it happen. We're not getting a handle on our evil garbage government. We're not doing anything to stop it. Except to elect Barack Obama, who some of us predicted before he was elected that he was installed, he was put where he was, with gigantic sums of Wall Street money in December 2007 and January 2008 to take over the delegates that Hillary Clinton was amassing, who is also corrupt. Barack Obama basically is the black overseer of a white plantation run by the Pentagon, the defense industries, and Wall Street. And he does a very good job. He puts a very good face on this government. He makes everybody think that he's a nice guy and he's in charge. Well, he isn't really in charge. He didn't even have his vice president appointed by himself. Biden was appointed by the people atop of him. And the reason I know this is you don't appoint somebody from a state with 3 electoral votes for vice president. You just don't do that. Why Biden? Because Biden has been the biggest brown-noser of the Pentagon in the last 40 years in the U.S. Senate. There is no Democrat who is a bigger brown-noser of the Pentagon than Joseph Biden. So they had him dangling over Obama, which Obama didn't want. He's shown physical torment at some of the things Biden has said in his presence. And he has denounced very subtly things that Biden has said, stupid jokes, which Biden is apt to do.
So who did you vote for in 2008?
Cynthia McKinney, who was the Green candidate, is the one I mentioned before. When she was a congresswoman, she got Rumsfeld to admit to the fact that there were drills going on, multiple drills, which now we know number over 24 that day, to keep all air defense and a lot of other implements, groups of people within the government who could have interfered with the hijackings that occurred in the Northeast Quadrant. She was the one who did that. She ran for president in 2008. I voted for a black person in 2008, and it wasn't Obama, it was Cynthia McKinney.
So that brings us back to your political orientation. You're running for the state Senate now with a group of secessionists, right? But
you could put it in those terms, although I don't
or
like
independent